Hello and welcome to our London History Podcast, where we share our love of London, its people, places and history. This podcast is designed for you to learn things about London that most Londoners don't even know, all in 20 minutes. I am your host, Hazel Baker, qualified London tour guide and CEO of londonguidedwalks.co.uk. If you like what you hear, then please rate and review on Apple or Google Podcasts. Thank you to all of you who have left a review. It's really very much appreciated. I read every single one. You've wanted videos. You want podcasts to be longer and also for better quality transcripts. And in light of that, we have made a few changes. We are now inviting you to become our patron, which will financially support the podcast. You can support our work and the unique content we provide from as little as £5. For more information of how to support us and or to access recommended readings and related blog posts, please go to londonguidedwalks.co.uk/podcast. Get that cup of tea, put your feet up and enjoy. The area of Bankside is one of the oldest settlements in Britain, dating back to over 6,000 years. And joining me today is our very own Dr. Stephen King, a City of Westminster guide, to tell me all about it. Hello.
Hello there. Hi, Hazel.
Thanks for joining us, Stephen. I'm really excited about this one, but I've got a first question for you is... You're a City of Westminster guide, and yet you're going to be talking about Bankside. Explain yourself.
Well, I have undertaken a City of Westminster course, which lasted a year at University of Westminster, which is great fun, and really love Westminster. And I do a range of Westminster tours as well. But working in Bankside and Borough, I've just fallen in love with the area. It's an absolutely fascinating gem of London.
It really is. I mean, it's got something for everyone, hasn't it?
It totally does. I mean, most people know Borough and Bankside because of the amazing Borough Market, and that is one of the main draws to the area. But once you get beyond Borough and start wandering the back streets of that area, you're just always uncovering something new, something amazing, and the links with the whole history of London.
Absolutely. So the area of Borough, even though I mentioned 6,000 years, I mean, it's really the Romans that started it all for us, isn't it?
Absolutely, Hazel. So if you imagine Julius Caesar lands down in about 50 AD down in Kent, he comes up to London. We actually imagine he actually crossed the Thames at where Chelsea Bridge is at the moment. He doesn't actually stay around very much and then disappears. But then the Romans properly invade a couple of decades later. They build an amazing castle down at Risborough, which is just outside Sandwich. And then they build a road straight up the Old Kent Road, end up on Borough High Street. So Borough High Street is a Roman road. Borough High Street has been there for almost 2,000 years. It's where the junction of Stane Street, which comes up from Chichester, and the road up from Dover and Sandwich, which is Watling Street, the famous Watling Street. And so they meet at where the St. George the Martyr Church is at the bottom of Borough High Street. And what you've got to imagine is during Roman periods, the Thames was very different to what it is today. It was a lot wider. There was none of the walls that we see along the Thames. It was a lot marshier. And so the Romans built the road up through Borough High Street, where Borough High Street is now. There was a bit of a raised, dry land. And then they build London Bridge. And London Bridge remains the only fixed crossing across the River Thames in London for almost a little under 2,000 years. The Romans originally built a wooden bridge that leads across the Thames to where the city is today. And that was very significant. And that's why Borough was basically the gateway into London for all those years. The other important fact about Borough is that as opposed to the city was all about the establishment. The city was all about money. It was all about regulations. The other side of the river, South London, was always a bit more unregulated. It was where the stuff that maybe the good citizens of the city didn't want in the city. They wanted it, but they didn't want it in the city. But to be fair, they didn't want it that far away from the city either. They wanted it close at hand. So that is really that kind of juxtaposition of the city and borough and why it's so important.
Absolutely. So we're talking about Bankside. As Stephen said, it is, if you've been to Borough Market, if you've walked along maybe the South Bank from the Tate Modern and you walk to Borough, well, this is the Bankside that we are talking about, and we'll share some photos with you as well. So I've come up with a number of B's, Stephen, that we can talk about Bankside. How about that? And I thought the first one that we could talk about is beer.
Yes, no, absolutely, Hazel. Beer is central to the story of Bankside. We know that beer has been brewed in Bankside since at least the time of Geoffrey Chaucer in the 14th century. He refers to getting quite drunk on Southwark ale in his time. One of the most important places in Bankside for beer was the Anchor Brewery. And you can still, as you walk along the riverside, you can see the Anchor pub on the waterside. But behind that, there was a absolutely massive brewery there that had a long history in Bankside. And you can see it's now gone. It's replaced with some quite nice social housing. But in the time, it was one of the largest breweries in the world. It was a visitor attraction. German princes would come and visit the famous Wales brewery on Bankside, and it has a long connection. It's so much history there. Interestingly enough, the Wales brewery was where the phrase horsepower was first invented. So they had a steam engine to pump the water up to get enough water for the beer, making of beer. And they needed to describe how powerful this steam engine was, and that's where the phrase horsepower was first invented. But you can see the evidence of beer all around Bankside, because the other aspect is, if you ever wondered the difference between ale and beer, ale was very much used without hops, while beer was used with hops. It was a foreign invention. We got it from the Flemish, and hops brought a bitter taste. It originally wasn't very popular, but because it preserved the alcohol longer, it then took off. And if you look around in the evidence all around Bankside, you can find where the hop exchanges were. Like I said, this was where the hop was being brought up from Kent, and you can see in the architecture all the little hop exchanges that happened there. And there's actually a massive hop exchange in Bankside. Interestingly enough, that massive hop exchange was it was a good idea, but it completely failed because it turned out the farmers didn't want to sit in a big room discussing prices with each other. They wanted to do all their deals in side rooms and in secret, basically, because they thought they could get the better price. So there's this absolutely enormous building, the Hop Exchange in Borough. But after about 3 years, it completely failed because nobody wanted to use it, because they were very wary about coming in and talking about their how they were doing their deals in public. But again, you just see it. And the other thing that Borough has in spades is wonderful pubs. So many interesting pubs with such history in that area.
Have you got any particular pubs that you'd like to share?
Oh, well, yes. There's so many. I mean, the classic pub that everybody having to visit Bankside has to go to is, of course, the George Inn, which is London's only remaining galleried inn. So if you go there, you are standing only a fragment of it remains, but a very important fragment of the George Inn remains. And if you go there, you can get the sense of what a Georgian galleried pub looked like. It is amazing. There's a whole book about it as well, Shakespeare's Local. Though there's no evidence that Shakespeare ever went to the George Inn, there's no evidence he never did not go to the George Inn. So, it's nice to imagine that possibly Shakespeare did hang out there. But certainly the pub that no longer remains, which is next door, is the White Hart. And again, we certainly know that Shakespeare did frequent the White Hart. And of course, the pub that no longer remains on the other side, the inn, the Tabard, again, we know Geoffrey Chaucer went there. But of the remaining pubs, you've got some wonderful ones. You've got the Globe, which of course appeared in various movies. You've got the Southwark Inn, which claims to have a series of cells underneath that you can go, old prison cells that you can have a drink in under the base of it. Little story, Hazel, that's not actually true. If you look at the old maps, although Bankside had lots of prisons in that area, where the Southwark Inn, there was never actually a prison there, but they're old storage places, but they are very atmospheric. If you ever go into the Southwark Inn, do go underground there. But then there's just so many other amazing pubs with amazing landlords as well. So if you ever get into the King's Head, you'll get hijacked by the landlord, who will show there's an amazing painting on the wall of his pub of the old London Bridge where it still had houses on. And actually the landlord is in that painting. He had himself painted into that, which covers the entire wall of his downstairs pub. So yeah, there's just so many in there.
And we'll put details about these pubs in the show notes. Also, for our silver and gold patrons, I've also done a little video of walking around Bankside where you get to see a lot of the places that we're talking about, including these pubs and the Globe and the Rose. Simply go to londonguidedwalks.co.uk/podcast and click on episode 46. And all the information, including how to become a patron and get behind the scenes and exclusive content, will be there. And you touched on another of my B words, which was the bard.
The bard, yes. He has a strong association with Bankside. What we know about Shakespeare is surprisingly fragmented. But we certainly know that the original theatre he was associated in London was in Curtain Road, which is to the north of the city. Because again, the city didn't want theatres in the city. They thought theatres were lewd places that various things could happen in. So they wanted them outside the city. The owner of the theatre, the Curtain, had a disagreement with his landlord. So they basically took it down, put it into crates, shipped it across the river, and built it again on Bankside. And so we know at the end of the 16th century, it goes up there in Bankside in the 1590s. And then that is where Shakespeare writes some of his best plays. In Bankside, we have plays being premiered. We have Hamlet being premiered in 1600, Othello 1604, King Lear 1605, Macbeth 1606, and it just goes on. But then the bad news happens in 1613. There is a production of Henry VIII, probably one of Shakespeare's lesser known plays. And what they're always doing in these plays is great effects to make the audience go, wow. And so they let a cannon off in Henry VIII to great effect. The roof lights up. There's a fire going on the roof. The audience actually think, this is amazing. What are special effects? It's not amazing. The roof has caught light. And so the entire theatre burns down 1613. But the audience, thankfully, although the audience was packed in here, they did get out. There's one story of a man whose trousers are burnt, but thankfully nobody's actually killed. So yeah, the building burns to the ground. They then rebuild it fairly quickly, but the story goes that this does impact on Shakespeare quite badly, apparently, and he dies actually back in his hometown of Stratford only a few years after this tragedy. So actually, if you go to the wonderful building on the riverside just next to Tate Modern, which is the wonderful Wanamaker reimagining of the Globe Theatre, it is very authentic. It's a very authentic building. It is open to the air. So if you go to a performance and you've got the cheap tickets and you're standing in front of the stage, you will get wet if it rains. I've only ever paid for the slightly more expensive tickets and sat down, so I've got a roof over my head. But you have to bring a cushion or get a cushion because they are hard seats. They are Tudor seats you're sitting on, and the roof it's a pre-1613 roof. It is a thatched roof because after 1613 they actually put tiles on the roof. So it's amazing. If you do go to the Globe Theatre, well, I know you have, but I'm saying to visitors, the Globe Theatre when it's open again, it's absolutely amazing place because the history there it's so authentic. They've got better fire regulations as well, by the way.
Well, that's reassuring. Yeah, that's a good top tip about taking a cushion. I must admit, the first time I went, well, let's just say I remembered to take a cushion the second time. And I also like getting a seat with a back. Because,
Yes.
you do, especially with Shakespeare, it's quite long sometimes, and you just want to relax a little bit, especially if you're sitting next to a complete stranger. You can't sort of lie back and put your arms up on the side like you can in normal theatre. So I like to get one of the seats that have got the toolbacks at the back. So that's another top tip for you there, Stephen, if you haven't done that one. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, to think of, let's do a special effect and then actually burning the whole theatre down. You really can't imagine it. And they do some really good tours in there as well. We have a number of volunteers who work for Shakespeare's Globe who come on our tours. And you've done it again, Stephen. You've hit on another B. So we've had beer, we've had the bard, and my third one for you was historic buildings. What historic buildings are there to see in Bankside?
Bankside has such a rich history, which is another way of saying actually some of the important buildings have been knocked down and built on top of. But actually, if you do go around there, you will still feel historic. So just to touch on the Globe Theatre, one of the things that I love doing on my tours is taking people to the original site of the Globe Theatre. Which was largely demolished to allow the building of the brewery, as we referred to earlier. So Thwailes Brewery kind of encroached onto, and actually there's a story of the wife of Mr. Thwailes talking about that ruin next to the brewery and could we get it pulled down. So unfortunately the Globe Theatre is largely built on as well by the entrance to the Southwark Bridge as well. But the Rose Theatre, which predates the Globe by a number of years actually, was right next door to the Globe. And interestingly enough, we know quite a bit of the history of the Globe Theatre by the archaeology that happened at the Rose Theatre. Again, that currently closed, big refurbishment going on there, but it is an archaeological site and you can hopefully in better times go and visit it again. So there's the evidence of what was there, of kind of standing up buildings, as it were, that you can really appreciate. I suppose the jewel in the crown is Southwark Cathedral, which is right next door to Borough Market. And it is a wonderful building. And again, so much history. If you go into Southwark Cathedral, I've done tours of about an hour around Southwark Cathedral, and you've only scratched the surface. You've got the old Roman road. You can see evidence of that in there. You can see fragments of the medieval building as well, and of course the later additions. So you've got graves there. One of Chaucer's best friends, Gower, is buried there, and you can see his tomb there. So much history, and of course there's a lovely monument to Shakespeare in there. Where he's holding a little bit of lavender in his hand, as they always place a little bit of lavender in his hand, and some wonderful stained glass windows. But again, the history is layer upon layer. So some of the trials that Mary I had against some of the Protestants, martyrs, as it were, during that period, took place in Southwark Cathedral. There's a wonderful story about Charles Dickens. Everywhere's got a Dickens story. Borough's got loads of them. Dickens ringing the bells at Southwark Cathedral. But interesting enough, it's changed over the years. So the actual main building of Southwark Cathedral now, the Georgians thought it was a good idea to have the cathedral without a roof for about 30 years, which means the main fabric of the building was in terrible condition. And so the Victorians, thankfully, rebuilt a large amount of the cathedral, but in a very tasteful way. And you'll notice if you ever go to the Royal Inns of Court, you'll notice it looks a lot like the inside of Southwark Cathedral because it was the same architect who did it. But saying which, there are still a lot of very historic elements of it. And of course, you can't not mention it as well, Harvard. There's a Harvard chapel in the cathedral, which again shows that link between John Harvard, who grew up in Bankside. His father actually worked both in the market, but he also owned an inn on Borough High Street. And it was Harvard who went across to America and was the foundations of Harvard University. although, interestingly enough, Harvard actually didn't live very long in America because he died less than 2 years after arriving. But he donated his books, which was the foundation of the library and the foundation of the university.
There's so much more to discover for Bankside, and you can attend Stephen's Bankside tour, and I'll put a link in the show notes at londonguidedwalks.co.uk/podcast. If you can't wait that long, then Stephen is doing a virtual Clapham Common tour. It's going live on Monday the 15th of March at 7 p.m, and you can buy your tickets, and I'll add those into the show notes. Don't worry if you're listening after that date. We also have a pay and play version where you can watch it in your own time, and I'll put the link in the show notes too. That's it for now. I really hope you enjoyed the beer, the bards and historic buildings of Bankside with the lovely Stephen King. See you next week.